On Story is brought to you in part by the Alice Clayburgh Reynolds Foundation, a Texas family providing innovative funding since 1979. On Story, presented by Austin Film Festival, a look inside the creative process from today's leading writers and directors. In this week's On Story, the Avengers' Zach Penn, Green Lantern screenwriter Michael Green, Hulk's John Turman, and Thor screenwriter Ashley Miller. This episode, our writers divulge the secrets of making popular comic book movies.
There's a Stan Lee quote. I think Stan said that at DC, they are heroes pretending to be ordinary people, and at Marvel, they're ordinary people pretending to be heroes. And if you look at, Clark Kent is a costume that Superman puts on, whereas Spider-Man is a costume that Peter Parker puts on.
I think looking at them now as just somebody who consumes comics, that the biggest difference is that a DC comic feels like it exists inside of its own world. That universe is its own universe. And that the Marvel universe exists, it's just a little bit, it's a degree off of where we are. It's like things happen in New York, things happen in DC or LA. They don't happen in Gotham City or Star City or any of that. It's like they happen in the here and now. Which can make it challenging for an adaptation. But at the same time, it also gives you some benefits because you don't have to justify why you're in this city with this really strange, ridiculous name.
The emphasis that, Lee and Kirby and all the guys at Marvel had in the 60s of telling a story about a real person who somehow becomes a superhero, even to the point of in Thor, twisting that to the point that a doctor finds a cane and switches places with Thor. They always found a way to make it a fundamentally human story, whereas DC, often the characters are more powerful than everybody else around them in the DC Comics world, with the exception of Batman, which is, I think, one of the reasons why it gets made so many times. But I think that's partly what made Marvel easier to translate to the screen, is that you're usually starting with a teenager who has problems in school, or you're starting with a group of outcasts who think they're normal, but it turns out they have something special about them. And so I do think that accounts for some of the easier transition that the Marvel stories have had to the screen.
And looking back, I realized, I was more interested in Spider-Man, X-Men when I was a little bit younger, and then when it was like fun to be fun, and then when I started getting moody in my teenage years, it was fun to be unhappy, and I started reading Batman and Superman. So if that's any indication of just how I perceive it.
I don't think comic book writing is a genre. I think some of these projects like Hulk are properly horror, and some of these are thrillers, and I always bristle at the idea of the genre of comic book. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of different genres.
Every year, someone would say to us, we think this is going to be the last superhero movie. So, that's why X-Men was called The Final Stand against and we didn't write it that way. They said, we think this era of superheroes is kind of coming to an end. And I said the same thing John says, these are not, X-Men's really a science fiction story. The Hulk's not a superhero at all.
The other thing is just to help the studios sometimes understand it, reminding them what genre they're telling. So you guys had Shakespearean family tragedy, and it was so clear that that's what it was, and that really came through from their hiring to the execution. With Green Lantern, the thing that helped us get the job when we did it was we were going to do a trilogy space opera. That's the way we sold it. It was going to be, Earth. It's going to be the first off-world one. It was going to, and that was the genre, but we were really sticking with the imagination at its core. You can really find that piece of DNA and hammering that one piece.
what my process was, mostly because it was fun, was to go back and read everything, particularly when the Ultimates, around the time that Bendis and Millar started working in the comic books, I started reading all these comics that actually had storyboard level art in it, you know, stuff that looked like, and it was, when I ended up talking to Millar and some of the other guys, they had designed their images to look like storyboards. So what I started doing was taking images, I didn't care what comic they were from, that I thought were cool, that looked like, I had that scene up on my wall, this planet's under my protection now. You know, do you think this A on my head stands for France? As a that was one I really wanted to get in Avengers that failed. But where the guy's saying give up and he says, you think this A on my head stands for France? It's funny. But what we would do is, we would do these really, me and people in my office would do these really big color Xeroxes of sequences or scenes that we loved, and I would just plaster my office with them. And when people, you know, who were working on the movie came to my office, or when I had an office at Marvel, they would walk in and see, yeah, there's the Golden Gate Bridge moving. We got to do that sequence, you know, and that was really helpful for me because it kind of gave you an idea of, I see it. I see this is going to work. Of course, that's such a great idea. And it also helps people, you know, see, oh, that's what the movie's going to look like. We tried to find key images that define the character, like for Avengers and even for the Captain America script, the idea that there is this incredible pathos of a guy coming back and the only person left is this 82-year-old woman. I mean, that ended up getting cut from Avengers, but in the comic, Peggy is still alive, but she's in her 80s, and there's a scene of him dancing with her, and the second you see that, you get the character. You get the idea that, wow, this must suck, being that the only person your age is about to die of old age. So I found going through all those comics, pulling out images, putting them up my wall, tremendously helpful, and I think it was helpful for the other people involved.
When each of you starts to work and map out, do you go back to the origin? Do you go back to the character? Do you go back to comic? Do you look at the previous movies or iterations of it before you get deep into the character you're going to write?
I think that it comes down to, why do you love a character? What is it about that character that you love? What makes that character work? If you understand that, write that. Don't try to make it better. Don't try to make it different. Pick those things that you dig. In Thor, we actually there was a lot of moments in the Ultimates, with Ultimate Thor, that I loved, that I thought were just perfect moments. Like, that moment when I think it's in Ultimates 2, when he hits the ground and it's it's after the Rainbow Bridge is opened and all the Acer warriors have come out and it's like they're all fighting and everybody had thought that Thor was crazy, and the gigantic lightning flash destroys it, and it's just totally insane. And there's just that one panel where it's like the rain is just streaming down his face and he just says, "This planet is under my protection now." And I'm like, that is the coolest thing ever. and that has to be in the movie. And to a certain extent it was, or the line got flopped. I'm like, guys, how did you miss that?
Your imagined slights. No, the Earth is under my protection, Loki.
But yeah, it's that kind of thing. It's what jumped out at me, what stayed with me, and those things went into the movie.
It's very easy to get caught up in, comics are iterations after iterations of let's vary the theme until you've lost the theme, and sometimes that's fun because you remember the history and how those comics got there. But you really have to go back to basics and go okay, when you're dealing with a character who isn't Superman, Spider-Man, Batman, you're kind of people may have heard of Thor, but everybody, you're telling them why he's awesome. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of people out there who are, they're willing to listen, they're there to hear it, but you've got to just find that, the one piece of DNA and really just make sure it goes through.
Superman sort of in a way, is the early definition. And you have a character who has great powers, but then there's kryptonite, but then there's the need to be Clark Kent and to assimilate and have both lives. There's the Lois Lane. Is there a love story? Why do all of you think that character sort of was able to be so seminal?
I think he's he is the modern god. I mean, he's the modern equivalent of a Greek god. And I think he exists as a symbol a wish fulfillment symbol for the public at large. I mean, Marvel movies there's usually an element of, and with many characters, the wish fulfillment is, man, I could be Peter Parker. Wouldn't that be cool if it was me? Superman's the guy who you wish existed, and I don't think it's, I'm sure during World War II, I was not alive during World War II, but I do think that the need for some sort of, godlike figure who can come down and solve problems, is pretty profound.
Superman can do everything.
He can do everything.
Go fast. He's strong.
It's one of the reasons he's the hardest character to write, because there's nothing.
He's so generic.
Yeah.
He has a broad appeal. It's like, how some actors become huge stars because the audience can project on them. They're a bit of a blank slate. Superman is Superman. He's not Spider-Man, which is really specific. And I think that that's a huge part.
Interestingly, it's Mickey Mouse in the same way. Like Bugs Bunny is the more interesting character, and Mickey Mouse is the more famous. He's a blank slate as well, except Superman does have the greatest origin story. No, arguably the greatest origin story, because it's just so emotional. Like you can tell it in 3 sentences to someone who's, I just told the Superman story to my 4-year-old daughter.
Yeah.
And it's like, crash landed, adopted. Like there's something really emotional about that. And when the origin story involves a baby, everyone wants that baby to grow up well.
Something I think that maybe we're missing in this whole discussion of Superman is we're missing Clark Kent. Here's a guy who, he's very humble. And by humble, I don't just mean he's like, no, really, I don't have superpowers. I mean, he's humble in that he's somebody who lives a life that you recognize. He's somebody who knows that he can do great things. But the world looks at him, and what they see is this man who wears glasses and just writes notes and writes these newspaper stories, and he sort of exists on the margins. And Superman allows him to be outside the margin. And I think when you pick up that book and you read that, there's a part of you that wants to be Superman, that wants to be the guy who's recognized, who lives outside of that margin, even though you feel like you're Clark Kent. I think that, you can pick up those books and you can think, Clark Kent looks at Lois Lane and wonders, I'm never going to get that girl. And she's always going to love Superman, and she's never going to love me.
Lois, for goodness sake, didn't you hear me knocking?
Uh-huh.
Lois, we did have a date tonight, remember?
Oh.
Lois?
Huh?
You haven't been,
Oh, no.
So it taps into, I think, some deeper things that maybe we don't always talk about, but that we recognize. So Superman can be both a wish fulfillment. Damn, I wish that I could shoot laser beams out of my eyes. And something that's very human, which is I know exactly what it's like to be invisible in a crowd. So I think there's something very powerful about that.
Heroes are generally only as good as their rogues gallery, and sometimes you look at a character and they give you someone will have done the research and go, here's who you have to choose their bad guys, and you're like, these are all pretty bad. And the secret hard part of writing any comic book stuff, when you're custodian of these great characters, is finding out what the bad guy's plan is. It's actually the hardest part, because the good guy's plan is easy. He wants to stop bad things from happening because it's a natural good. That's the easy part. It's who is the bad guy and what does he want is hard. And you're in writers' rooms or you're in story meetings and everyone's like, well, can't he just be bad? No, he can't just not if you want to do a movie with any complexity to it.
He's right. That's the thing that works about Magneto. He's really kind of right.
Don't give up on the Merrick.
What would you have me do, Charles? I've heard these arguments before.
It was a long time ago. Mankind has evolved since then.
Yes, into us.
Even when he's wrong, you kind of think, maybe they should do what Magneto says instead of what Professor X says. I mean, Lex Luthor's a great character, but you never think, oh, this is a good idea. You think that's good for him. But with Magneto, you're like, if I were them, I would listen to Magneto. And I think that's what makes him a fantastic villain.
I will bring you hope, old friend. And I ask only one thing in return. Don't get in my way. We are the future, Charles, not them. They no longer matter.
One of the advantages of a villain like Magneto, who's not just out to destroy but has an agenda, is that the government or whatever the third party is has a different take on the situation, and they're interfering with the heroes as much as the villain is. You're just going to have to trust me, having written a million movies like this. It just makes for a much easier to construct plot.
Drop the knives and put your hands in the air.
What's going on here?
One of the things that really works is, a lot of Marvel movies, a lot of movies in general tend to break down into a third act where you've got one strong guy fighting another strong guy, or fill in the blank, one antagonist versus protagonist. It's always more interesting when you have multiple storylines coming into, if you're writing your screenplay, if you can have 3 different strands that all culminate in the third act, you'll have a much better, more satisfying third act than when you have to get down to the Hulk fights Abomination in the street over nothing.
I'm not that interested in villains who think that they're villains. I think the best villains think that they're the hero of another movie, and I think that when you can find a villain who's informed by that, you have something interesting. And I think all villains who really have that narrative in which what they're doing is ultimately good, even if it's destroying the earth to do it, is much more interesting.
One of our mandates when we wrote Thor, other than, oh dear God, please make this work, was we need a villain as good as Magneto. We need somebody that can inform the Marvel Universe, and we think that Loki has that potential, so try to give us somebody like that. So when we designed the movie, we spent as much or more time designing Loki's emotional arc. That the whole story was really about, Thor says, Dad, why didn't you commit genocide, you weenie?
There won't be a kingdom to protect if you're afraid to act. The Jotuns must learn to fear me, just as they once feared you.
That's pride and vanity talking, not leadership. You've forgotten everything I taught you.
He gets kicked out of Asgard, and Loki says, well, Thor kind of had a point.
I now take from you your power. In the name of my father and his father before. I own it all, father. Cut you out!
And, by the end of that story, that Loki, to earn the love of his father, to prove that he was worthy, basically does this thing that Thor essentially sets in motion.
Why have you done this?
To prove to father that I am a worthy son. When he wakes, I will have saved his life. I will have destroyed that race of monsters, and I will be true heir to the throne.
You can't kill an entire race.
Why not?
It's really about this family dynamic. And of course, when you're pitching Shakespearean family dynamic to Kenneth Branagh, you win.
It's always easier to write a character that's like on the line between good guy and bad guy than it is to write someone who's a pure bad guy, in my opinion, because it's so, whenever you fall into mustache twirling, it sucks. So you just have to avoid that.
Unless you have an awesome mustache.
Right. If you've got a great mustache. I mean, in Gangs of New York, for example, that mustache deserved to be twirled. Right.
Hi, I'm John Mitchell, and I'm the writer and co-director of Superpowers. I actually got the idea for Superpowers when I was walking through the West Village one day, and I saw a Wonder Woman outfit in the window. And it got me thinking a lot about, identity and superheroes and, why someone would want to dress up like that in a kind of bedroom situation. From there, I just started writing and came up with the idea for Superpowers. I think probably the most difficult part about making Superpowers was just the general size of it. Not only were we shooting on film, but we had a few different locations to deal with. We had, we wanted to get our characters and take them from an apartment and then throw them out on a fire escape, have them run down that fire escape, and then through the very public New York City street. For us, if the film was a success, if people walked away laughing, if they could somehow link into these characters, get the situation right away, and then somehow be moved by it and moved to laugh, then I think we did our jobs. Up next is my film Superpowers. Thanks for watching.
And got them for us. What do you think? You hate them.
Our problems are not sexual, Jenny. This is just economics.
It's not just economics.
It is. It is. And dressing me up as Wonder Man's not going to do anything to help the situation.
That's a Batman costume.
Batman, then. From now on, you can tell Anne to keep her cosmopolitan sex tips to herself. For a woman with 4 cats and no boyfriend, she has an unhealthy amount of vested interest in our sex life. I'm not putting that on.
Mr. and Mrs. Elliott, I'm Linda Robinson. Let's go up and take a look, shall we? Okay, you come this way. And upstairs is this fabulous apartment.
Is this what you wanted? Is this what you wanted to see? See your big, fat husband dressed up like someone else?
Why can't you just have fun with it?
Because I look ridiculous.
You just don't get it, Larry.
I have them in here somewhere.
Wheeler.
Hey, here we are. Johnny! Go ahead, take a look around. It's a pre-war building, and as you can see, it gets plenty of light. This is the living area.
This is a 2-bedroom?
It's a 2-bedroom if you want to use this as a bedroom.
I see.
And down the hall there is a lovely view of the city.
Is there a lot of crime in the neighborhood?
Not at all. I'll be glad to take you around to some of the local shops when we're done here. Jenny? Mr. Powers?
I'm just getting out of the shower.
Some prospective renters would like to talk to you about the neighborhood.
Just a second.
Where are the towels?
I packed them.
Wait till you see the bathroom. It's just been renovated with a jacuzzi tub.
Hey, what are you doing?
She's a friend of my mother's, Larry. If you want to go out there, be my guest.
Sure thing, Mr. Powers.
I know this looks strange.
What can I help you with, Mr. Powers?
You all right, Mr. Ling?
What the fuck are you supposed to be?
Larry.
What the?
I'm Batman.
wonder about local shops. Let me show you the laundromat.